5 days after we recorded this episode on direct action, John Lewis passed away. And there's no possible way that we could release this conversation without talking about John Lewis and dedicating our conversation here to his legacy. To say that he will be missed is an offensive understatement. To be frank, when the news hit, it wasn't just a sensation of immense loss. It felt like a vacuum of dignity and strength materialized at the corner of Auburn Avenue and Jackson Street. He was our congressman for over 15 years. Kyle and I have always been in his district, and it's difficult to convey the sense of pride and honor that comes with being represented by a civil rights icon. Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he was recently memorialized at his funeral, is mere blocks from here, where Martin Luther King Jr. and his father before him served as pastors. It's where the Black Lives Matter protests that we were a part of would often start and stop. And as you know, we love this city, come hell or high water. And so we loved John Lewis. His legacy is the stuff that Atlanta is made of, and we mourn his loss. So as we talk in this episode about how music binds us together and compels those of us with conscience to take action for others in love, I want you to keep in mind the living example of two distinct but compatible truths. John Lewis was the man who said, "We do not want our freedom gradual. We want to be free now." And yet, John Lewis was also the man who would go on to describe an incident when he was younger. He was beaten bloody by members of the KKK attempting to enter a, quote, white waiting room. And he said that many years later, in the February of 2009, one of the men who had beaten me came to the Capitol Hill office. He was in his 70s and his son was in his 40s. And he said, "Mr. Lewis, I am one of the people who beat you and your seatmate on a bus." And he said, "I want to apologize. Will you accept my apology?" And John Lewis accepted his apology, and he hugged his father and his son. He hugged these people, and they cried together. And John Lewis said, "It is the power in the way of peace and in the way of love. We must never, ever hate. The way of love is a better way." For us Atlantans, good trouble is deep in our bones, and we join together with this community in ensuring that good trouble only creates more freedom and more forgiveness and more love.
You're listening to TuneDig, a podcast for music lovers.
What to do with all that energy from the last episode? We laughed, we cried, we flipped a table, we celebrated the death of one of America's most beloved presidents. Where do we go from here? Which is a question that Dr. King posed at the end of his life, and I hope that you read that in The Three Evils. Add that to your homework. In thinking about how to group these songs, one, I think it was interesting when we thought about direct action and getting pumped to actually do something. We both went to our respective punk rock corners. So when we talk about being punk rock kids, I probably cite that out of the need for cred a lot more than you do. But like ideologically, a lot of the touch points of punk that made us who we are reflected in here. We left some of the gnarliest stuff off, like Trap Them, but we don't have to get quite there. But in thinking about a framework for this, speaking of Killer Mike, his plot, plan, strategize, organize, mobilize refrain that has been picking up steam seemed like a good way. Like everything seemed to line up pretty neatly with that. So we got a batch of songs for plot, plan, and strategize are really like kind of one thing. It's like your Crouching Tiger moment. And then songs for organizing and really knowing what your demands are. and then mobilizing. And then ending on a note of another thing that Mike says all the time is like love and respect. Because there is a lot of uncomfortable tension and friction in getting people who don't want to change. So just remembering the end goal at the end of all this is beloved community, is peace and harmony, is getting to a place of loving thy neighbor as thyself. So I think 2 of the 3 songs in that last block were selected by you, and it's not a note that I would have thought to end on. I would have ended it with a big long middle finger in everybody's face. But again, that's counterproductive. And I think the goal is to like get as many people on board to the movement as possible. So,
well, I mean, we talk a big critical game about people who can't currently conceptualize the oppression that they are a part of. But at the end of the day, what we want is for people to take note that they're on the wrong side of that razor and flip over to the other side. Like, oh, okay, I need to correct something because I'm not the person I want to be. Yeah. Great. We welcome you.
And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. We're not indicting you. Like, please come with us.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be inviting you if we thought you were a bad person or you were beyond hope or whatever.
Yeah, we criticize each other like this.
Yeah. Yeah, you piece of shit.
I know. Pick better friends.
I think I had a show note in here that you called out on Slack and you were like, yeah, that's objectively wrong. I'm gonna just disagree with you on that if you say it out loud. That's what friends are for.
For sure. Yeah, this first group, solid batch. I definitely want to hit on a couple of these before we move into them. But again, at this point, just taking a lot of pride in our ability to put together even sub-playlists that no one would ever conceptualize.
Yep.
And this one's a great one, starting off with the first line in Awake from Trash Talk. In the land of Nod, he who sleeps with both eyes open is God. And just like, okay, that's me and you's starting point for life in general, is like ridiculously pervasive statements like that.
And musically, it drops in with the big drum beat and it feels like a skateboarder dropping in.
Yep.
And the video is awesome because it opens with like a provocative man on the street. And then it launches right into the song.
Yeah.
And it's a dude skateboarding around, like breaking shit, like actively antagonizing the world around him. Not even really to get a rise. The video is like actual anarchy, what it looks like. And musically it feels like that, where it's like you drop in and you're automatically going 60 miles an hour already. And you're like, your body's got to catch up to the G-force. And so the lyrics are like almost the least of it.
Yep.
But if you're ready for action, you need to start at 60 miles an hour and get ready to run through a brick wall.
Yeah. I do love, though, that first phrase of in the land of Nod. So Nod is where Cain was exiled in the Bible after murdering Abel. And Nod is supposed to mean like being outside the presence of God. Or Augustine described it as carnal disquietude, which I think is like, it's a good...
Yeah, y'all didn't know y'all were getting that shit on here.
It's a good way to describe, I think, maybe the things that you and I have in common about what's the feeling of the shift once you're at the top of the ramp.
Yep.
You're like, okay, there's no need to dissect this statement too literally, but at the top of the ramp is, there is no God. Go. Like, you know, like everything we were taught, believed all of this stuff, like these were abstractions that were neatly packaged to mean things or to get us to do things. Saying, when we talk about being...
White Jesus says, give us 10%.
White Jesus is a great example. Like when we talk about being godless, it's shirking the things that you were told that you need to believe about the world around you and saying, you know what? If there's a there, I'm going to start from scratch. I'll build this world myself. And until then, nothing else is worth trusting. Break.
Awake, 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 awake.
Yep.
I love the way it's like a caveman, you know. To me, it's like punk rock caveman, stay woke. And like stay woke has lost all of its teeth. And But just be like, it's just a reminder. You've meditated and you're centered and all that, but it's time to get awake. You know, like, come on, man, get out of bed. There's shit to do. Like, we gotta throw Molotovs to the prison industrial complex. This is what abolition is, man. Wake up, just crack a beer. Let's have fun. Speaking of godlessness, let's go into the next song.
Yeah, and speaking of too that moment of like, and now you're awake, like. Seeing The Truth Weighs Nothing by Gaza live when they were still a band was one of the most pointed moments of carnal disquietude I have ever experienced in my life, because at that time, you know, the band is essentially the band Cult Leader now. They were in a band before. They had a vocalist who, for all appearances, seems to not have been a super great dude. But let's set that aside and just think of like the physicality of this standard looking band. No offense to Cult Leader, but then this dude was like 6'4", huge. And they're playing,
That's an imposing figure.
Ugh.
Yeah.
And nothing about his outward appearance or facial expression or demeanor indicated there's something redeeming about me. So it's just fear, which was perfect for a punk show because they were playing in Hell at the Masquerade. I've only ever seen a couple of shows at the Masquerade where or in Hell at the old Masquerade where it was already really small, but then like almost no one showed up for a particular show. And if you see the right band in that scenario, they're
terrifying.
It's a prompt.
They occupy the whole space.
Yes.
And you really think like, this is going to be violent.
Yeah. So he spent most of this song down off the stage.
Gallows, Frank Carter did the same thing.
Yeah. But I mean, you kick off a song with, it sure was nice of Jesus to take time away from ignoring ethnic cleansing, genocide, and famine-bloated children, or regrowing limbs for landmine victims to help you score that touchdown. Ooh. Like, okay. But even like,
to help you find your keys, to help you land that promotion. Yep. It reminds me of the Amy Schumer skit where Bill Nye is like, the universe is not some concept that helps you live, laugh, love better, you stupid asshole. It has no motivation. It's an unfeeling thing. It's literally just atoms moving toward entropy and chaos. You mean nothing.
Yeah. Build the world from scratch. Start with what's actually true, right? And so it's a relatively short song, but like that's the thing that we drop into at the song. And then at the end of it, which is both effective live and on recording, when you're wrapping up with wake up, the truth weighs nothing, travel light, be unburdened. And there's a whole bunch to dive into, I think, with that band and this record and all sorts of things if we wanted to.
A record called No Absolutes and Human Suffering, by the way.
But I mean, it is a pointed indictment of the raw laziness of organized religion in the face of massive oppression in the world around it. And I think, though, to translate this out of just direct punk anger, which it definitely is, actually the end of this reminded me of a quote that Ram Dass liked to bring out a lot, which is, truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing, where in order to see the world around you, you have to stop expecting it or being attached to the world around you being the way that you want it to be,
because
or not being the way
suffering.
You don't want it to be. Yeah. And so in order for you to see things, you've got to empty things out and start from scratch. So that's, I think...
And that's the number one basic tenet of mindfulness and meditation, right? Is like living not awake is being in the river and letting the current push you wherever. Mindfulness is taking your eye to the side, to the riverbank, and saying, I can't control the flow of this river, but I can observe how it is. And that's a practice. That's a lifelong practice because it transcends our natural instincts as wild animals trying to survive. Yeah. Also, there aren't a lot of places where the Venn diagram is a circle for us, but this record was produced by Kurt Ballou. We talked about Converge. And I, have half joked that the best heavy records of any given year or whatever's on Kurt's production discography that year, he finds a way and he finds the bands and curates that like raw nerve heaviness where it feels like cold hits an exposed nerve. It's just voltage, and you touch your hand to it and you become a mutant, and you could throw a car through a plate glass window just with your own adrenaline strength. Like, that's what I love about Gaza and about this song is it's just like, whoa, it's like Altered Beast a little bit, and you just completely level up and you're ready for the next thing. Which is Pete Seeger. You want to talk about the unions?
Let's take a sharp turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to take a little bit of a breather after a song like that. And this Seeger song is like the Bob Dylan song in that it's deceptive if you don't really listen to the words. Because it's sort of like, this song feels like Martin Luther stapling the things on the church door, the theses. It's a little bit like that. And, the anti-union bosses having something to say about that.
I do want to pick this apart just a minute for the purposes of really, I think, excavating the most important parts of this song and even the presentation of it, because I personally learned a lot, even just doing a basic bit of like, tell me a little bit more about like, I know that this song came from someone else. So like, tell me about that story. So the songwriter was Florence Reese. Pete Seeger just popularized it. Also, Pete Seeger, I just want to acknowledge, has some pretty dubious history and has some pretty rough, late-breaking beliefs about Stalin and such. So, but what I want to do is like refocus this on where this song came from. He popularized it. He did a good job with it. That's fine, but we can set him aside a little bit and I think talk about this because, again, this brings up this moment of, okay, we've gone through Awake, we've gone through The Truth Weighs Nothing, which means, okay, I want to try to take reality as it comes to me. For me, even posing which side are you on was for a long time like a false choice. I don't need to pick sides. Binaries are unhelpful.
All lives matter.
Please don't attribute that to me necessarily.
I'm just saying you can see where that ideology can spin you out into that play. You put one foot in the hot tub of relativism, and before you get, you have to like put some boundaries and some lines, or it's just everything all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is a perfect example of when we have the privilege of mentally abstracting the oppression of other people, we can imagine the scenario in which the oppression doesn't exist at all. So we can say things like, all lives matter, because we can envision this imaginary world in which everyone actually was treated equally. But the problem is, and that this is what was really helpful to me, was to really understand the story here, because this is a little bit more like the, when they came for this group, I said nothing because I wasn't this group. And it's a little bit like, hold on, when someone asks you which side are you on, you don't have to pick a side until they come for you, because eventually there's a they. In oppression, there is an oppressive side, no matter what you want to do.
Generally,
right?
It's the rich.
That's right. And yeah, so like classic story, we're in the middle of the Great Depression. Like the song
Great Depression,
right? Throwback to where we are right now. So in the middle of the Great Depression, okay, so at a time where people can't find work, massive unemployment, all that stuff, right? So this is written about what's called the Harlan County War. Essentially, Harlan County coal coal owners and operators, in an effort to expand national dependency on their fuel, chose to sell below cost, okay? So we're in the Great Depression. As a business owner, I need to make more money, which is, above board in America, no matter who it hurts, right? So
for a brief time, we created lots of shareholder value.
Oh, those things you love to say on your deathbed. So the business makes a choice. Okay, we've got to expand, right? We've got to do the freemium model, essentially, get a bunch of people on board. In order to do this, we need to sell below cost. Okay, so perfectly normal sounding business decision. So what happens? Same thing that happens with Reagan. How do we get money up to the rich people so that it trickles down? We take it from poor people. It always happens the same way. And so in 1931, the Harlan County Coal Operators Association cut miners' wages by 10%. Already impoverished people who work in extremely dangerous situations, who are having trouble making ends meet, right? And so
Also with no employer-sponsored health insurance.
Almost like that should never have happened to begin with.
Tight gig economy.
So the miners organize. We have to have some say in how we're treated because we don't have other options, right? And it's also really important to keep in mind the inability to move geographically was like really obvious at this time in history too. It's easy for us to theorize now. You can just go get a job in another place and move, despite the fact that it never works that way logistically. But like literally people are stuck living in a town where they live in order to work at the place that's nearby. And when they don't have enough money, there are no other options. And so they're organizing. And then what's starting to happen here in the song when it pulls out and it says, they say in Harlan County, there are no neutrals here. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Kyle, who was J.H. Blair?
Cliff, who was J.H. Blair?
He was a sheriff. It's the police. It's always the police somehow. So this was just a nice,
it's the rich. The police just do their bidding.
It hit me like a ton of bricks in a way where I was already expecting the song to hit me like a ton of bricks, to go into it and go, oh my God, it's the same story. Businesses make non-human decisions supported by government structure. The police enforce the business decisions because the businesses are supported by government structure. People die. Like, this is the story that gets told over and over again. And so all of that energy put into this song.
Sir, this is a conference on email marketing.
Oh, man. Like, it's important, I think, to remember not only that these stories are cyclical, but they always seem to deal in this matter of someone chooses to be the they in a situation where there are sides. Just because it's easy to abstract it away doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So what happened was these miners are working, already not making enough money, and then they become a side because their side had money taken away from people who had the ability to do so through the threat of violence via police. And so the sides come for you sometimes, and I think that as white dudes especially is a nuance that's worth putting into practice in reality. When we feel like people are choosing sides sometimes in, maybe they're over dramatizing it. Why are you making it about this? Right? And like, I hear a lot of that right now with the Black Lives Matter protests. Like, I don't understand why you're making it about police and not black on black violence or something. No. Sides end up being chosen by the oppressors who put people in another box and say, you are now the oppressed. You've got to choose a side.
That's the wild thing to me about the whole thing is like the great marketing move of American society has been conditioning people to take the side of the people who already have all the power and don't need the help. Like, don't we love an underdog story? Weren't we founded by rebels? I mean, they wanted to be able to be their own slaveholders, and that's its own thing. But I just don't understand where we got so disconnected from our own kind of like narrative arc in the whole thing. We're in season 9 of Scrubs or whatever the hell. America is a lot like Scrubs in that it probably never deserved to exist. I think there's an interesting thing that you said that kind of rolls over into the next song, which is "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" by Gil Scott-Heron. Is that one of those hard pills to swallow in adult life is realizing that it's not even most of the time active hatred for the other by the people in power. Yep. It's just a cynical, shitty vested interest in the status quo. Yep. Things work for me. I don't care what the costs. I feel good. I want to continue to feel good.
Yeah. I'm not on a side.
Right.
I'm above the sides.
There are no sides.
Yeah, sides are for people who aren't as smart as me.
Right. We're all one human race in that I'm going to take the money from all humans. But this idea of the revolution will not be televised, it will be live, is like, of course, you're not nobody, the system is not going to encourage you to dissent or to be free or to have an American dream. The system wants you right where you are. Like, it's not broken. It's working the way that it's supposed to. So the idea that you got to like tune out what is televised, what is kind of the monocultural ideal of the way things are, and the leave it to beaver existence. Like, no, you got to get out. You got to turn off the TV. You got to go out there and be present in your real life. You got to step outside, start marching, and join the fight. Because what really needs to happen is counter to all of the messages that you're getting and you're receiving. Like, the worst thing that you could do in the whole world is be complacent and sit still. And like, Gil was such an incredible poet. Like, he just turned words into just the rhythm of a Gil Scott-Heron song and poem is so incredible that it's like, I mean, it's like flubber bouncing around the room, you know. It takes all of these thoughts and it makes them very visual and visceral. And he's such a great orator in that way too. This is one of my favorite songs, period. Like, if I started a band, every time we went on tour, I would want to open with "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" and just put a delay echo on live at the end of the song, just to remind people, like, we're about to play some country music or whatever, but you're here for the real deal. Them Crooked Vultures, one of the best live bands we've ever seen, had that song Reptiles. And I'll never forget, Josh Homme was like, you're all here tonight, and this moment is all we have, and this is really special, and you're like part of a club or whatever. This next song is about all the people out there. You know, again, whose side are you on? The reptiles, the unfeeling, the cold, the people that want to atomize every part of your existence so that they can profit.
And I think it's worth taking the risk of reapplying the context of "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" to now. I really want to encourage people. I know that it feels like you're doing important things when you watch a television pundit that you feel like you do or don't agree with. It feels like you're talking. I'm even talking about John Oliver at this point, although at least it's a little bit different from the network television, where like, okay, this song is about the corporations are sponsoring things and it will never be the important things. Okay, if you're watching a talking TV pundit whose livelihood is based on commercials from corporations, there's a little bit of movement in there, sure. Like, sometimes you can change advertising dollars. Ultimately, the revolution will not be televised there. It just won't. The system is the interconnectedness of corporations being able to build the economy the way that they want to. And when it drives your ability to talk about things and say things, the revolution will not be televised.
Yeah, it sets the agenda.
Yeah, turn it off and go talk to somebody else in real life who's not currently sponsored by Colgate or whatever, you know? I love the part where he's like, the revolution will not make your mouth have sex appeal. Like, I just love how weird commercials used to be, but it's such a good example now.
A white tiger, a white tornado, a white... Yeah. Yeah. Engelbert Humperdinck or whatever.
So sliding into the less nuanced portion of this block, I would say, like, we're going to go through Dead Prez, though. This record all day for me, all the time in general, although we chose the song Hip Hop here, which I personally love because I think it showcases some super early Run the Jewel vibes that people felt maybe came out of nowhere, because there's so much Killer Mike and Jamie cadence here.
Wasn't there... was this the Chappelle Show theme, or it was an integral song to early Chappelle Show? that was certainly how I came across it. And then Dead Prez played the Block Party. And so that was how I came across it. My favorite part of the song is the part that they do a cappella in the middle. But you're right about the cadence being very Run the Jewels-esque.
Yeah. But this whole record is a good one for all the context we're talking about here.
It's called Let's Get Free, which I mean is like, it's so t-shirtable. They sell the t-shirt in the OK Player shop, but it's a good, if you need a refrain, a mantra to come back to for like doing the work. It's like, you know, let's free all of the oppressed peoples. And like, if you get to be free, why shouldn't other people? And not like free to do free enterprise, but like free to not live in poverty and oppression their whole life. And somewhat to that point, my favorite, you know, the whole second verse, I guess, is like MCs get a little bit of love and think they hot. Talk about how much money they got. All your records sound the same. Same scenes in the video, monotonous material. But he says, would you rather have a Lexus or justice, a dream or some substance, a Beamer, a necklace, or freedom? And again, in context, thinking about how that cut against primetime, hyper-materialist hip-hop. Like, hip-hop was absolutely as capitalistic as it could have possibly been. Like, that was the era of Big Timers and the Pen and Pixel Diamond album covers and Number One Stunna and, like, all of that sort. It was a little later than all that, but it was, like, in the shadows of all that. Coming up around the same time as College Dropout when, you know, it's funny to talk about Kanye in that context now, but like
it was earnest then.
Arguably sort of earnest anti-capitalism or just like questioning what is this all for? That's not really necessarily our agenda. That comes from a sort of place of outside influence. This song cuts through that with a great deal of intensity.
Yeah, and I also feel it's worth mentioning, since I'm going to attempt to touch on every possible social topic within the scope of 2 episodes here. Woo. Hey.
We got to get it out of our system a little bit.
Totally. I mean, the lyrics you just pulled out are also a great example of a lot of the bullshit I'm hearing too about like, well, hey, why doesn't the Black community address violence within its own community? Like, if you're unaware of the way that the Black community has been able to critique itself over time, it's because you haven't asked any questions. There are tons of organizations doing it, right? Even if you just talk about violence, tons of organizations, tons of activists, tons of people who have been yelling about that same thing. Also doing that work in spite of being actively destabilized consistently generation after generation.
Exactly. On an ongoing basis. Like
yeah.
in the 80s, trying to prop up their communities, even though there's a combination of crack being flooded in by the actual government of our country, and then the tax dollars and revenue from the cities. You know, there's a very recent city council meeting where there's a guy in a mask talking about how most of the cops aren't policing their own neighborhoods. They're physically taking the tax dollars from their salary. They're taking the tax base away back to the suburbs, so that reinforces inequality. All of that plays a role, and yet we have the audacity to be like, quit fighting amongst yourselves. Like, quit not being exactly perfect when we're actively ruining your lives.
Right. Yeah.
Why you hitting yourself, bro? Why you hitting yourself?
Oh, it feels like that. But like this is just such a straightforward, direct example of the countless times in hip hop where the hip-hop community critiqued itself. Hey, it's great that you got the money. It's great that you made your fortune. It's great that you're popular. It's good. That's hard to come by. All that stuff is fine. Don't forget about the bigger points. And there's plenty of critique. So I felt like calling that one out at the very least before we get to the least nuanced band that's ever existed, which is sort of their point.
But apparently still too nuanced for a lot of their current fans. Did you know that Rage Against the Machine was a political band? I'm very offended to have learned that.
I believe that is a fake meme. I don't believe anyone feels
it's a
that.
psyop.
Russ is over there like, I've got an idea. What if we questioned what Rage Against the Machine meant? Totally.
Rage Against the Machine, just party band with heavy guitar.
You earned it, entire country.
So we covered the record that this was on, and we literally made the T-shirt because specifically I wanted this refrain on a T-shirt because I needed to keep this in mind for myself. Like, we've been winding ourselves up a lot over the course of these 2 episodes. And we have so much more to go in this one. But, you know, in addition to the verses of, for example, what does the billboard say? Come and play, forget about the movement. He whispers it on the record, but he yells it live. He says, your anger is a gift. And I think reframing it in your mind that way and remembering, like, you are awake, you are aware now, like, you have to do something, you have the energy, you have to do something with it. And that's why I would choose this song probably over other Rage songs, because it reminds you, like, the idea of freedom and the American dream is sort of a farce. It's sort of a marketing message. Freedom, yeah, right. But if that makes you angry that it's a farce, you remember to use that like a gift. Like, what an opportunity to be living in this moment and to be able to change the course of history for the better, rather than doing nothing and being on your deathbed and having your grandparents ask you, like, what'd you do about climate change? No, nothing. I ate a lot of beef. Had a real good time. All of these blocks remind me of that Carlin bit. One of my favorite stand-ups of all time was Carlin's Life is Worth Losing. And right around the middle of that, he does a long bit about how dumb Americans are, and apologies if that offends you, I guess, but he punctuates that bit by saying it's called the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. So it starts with a song called Awake, and I think it's really about, like, the plot plan and strategize is to wake yourself up and to wake up the others around you and to find co-conspirators, John Brown style, who are ready to, like, raid on Harper's Ferry and, like, do the damn thing.
From all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised.
1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 my dog is bigger than hip hop, hip hop, hip hop, hip. It's bigger than hip hop, hip hop, hip hop, hip hop.
One thing about music, when it hit, you feel no pain. White folks said controls your brain.
like, what do we want, I guess, is really the first question, right? Like, it's the everything problem. Everything around us is broken. Where do we start, right? If we think about it with a private sector mentality, like, what's the strategy? What are the questions we ask? What are the goals? What are the KPIs of the movement, if you will? And so the important thing to do next is to organize, right? Is to have that conversation with people in your community who are also not happy with the way things are, and thinking about what are we for, and more importantly, what are we against? So in this block, the class war rock block, are some punk rock favorites of ours. No commercials. No commercials, because we're not trying to sell cheeseburgers after a song.
If that
called
doesn't
Eat
get
the
us a
Rich.
radio show, nothing will.
Clear channel. Do They Owe Us a Living by Crass, into Eat the Rich by Motorhead, into Fearless Vampire Killers from the Bad Brain self-titled, into Nazi Punks Fuck Off. Love. I'm not even going to say the name of the next one, but it's about a flag, and it's by Propagandhi. You're welcome to say it when we get into
Stick
it.
the fucking flag up your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch.
Beep, 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 beep.
I picked it on purpose.
Nuance. The E.E. Cummings poem of punk rock, and then into Refuse Resist by Sepultura.
You made the nuance joke, but like the whole reason this block is great is because we currently don't need it in the organization portion of this. Like, okay, we let our heroes die in the last block. We know that now the only reality that we need to try to accept is the one that we're actually experiencing. Take the framing off. And to me, that's why Do They Owe Us a Living by Crass is on here. The whole, one of the main lines in here is fuck the politically minded. Here's something I want to say about the state of the nation and the way they treat us today. And like, I think it's important to remember, like, people love to say, I'm not political. And then they also love to say everything is political. Those are saying the same things. I think, but what we can agree on, because everything is political in the sense that everything affects everyone else around us. Every decision you make in community has ripples. But I think what we can more helpfully talk about is I reject the framing of the two-party political system around the needs of human beings. So to me, Do They Owe Us a Living was such a great example. These are just anarchists. The song was written in an anarchist commune. It was designed to just have punk shows in the commune, and then they ended up being able to take off with this song and one other one, basically, and just became an anarchist punk band. And if you're not familiar with anarchy in general,
I don't know what it means, but I love it.
Not diving into it a ton here, but one of the things I think is important to take out of it is like, we're going to see a couple of examples in this block of anarchists taking positions for and against, sort of like the which side are you on that we've talked about. Sometimes there are inevitably sides. It's not just dichotomies you're setting up. And so the whole chorus is this.
It's more than the only way to live in this world is without rules.
So like this connected with me, this song did, however long ago it was I first heard it, but like, do they owe us a living? Of course they do. Like these are my political beliefs now. I don't need to break down how we conceptualize it. Okay, taking that action is important. It will take time. Large-scale change is nuanced and very difficult. But the question of, does someone deserve to be alive just because they've been brought to life on this planet? Yes, of course they do. Like, it was so much easier just to see it this way.
Why is there a sliding scale for human rights, right?
Yeah.
Like, why do some people have more of a right to be alive and healthy than other people? Like, how could you politicize that? How can you look at your neighbor or like think about a kid your kid goes to school with or whatever and be okay with like,
right?
It's not, nah, it's fine. You do your own thing. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps.
That's
You've been sold such a shitty, poisonous bill of goods if you can do anything less than like trying to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. Like saying, of course, you're owed a living doesn't mean I specifically and personally have enough money to where I should be able to give it to you so that you can stay alive, and we should have to share money directly that way. Like, the government exists as an organization for us to make our money efficient, to make sure that the people who we don't know who to pay attention to don't get caught below the nets. Like, I just love to kick off this block with this particular song. There's nothing else about it. It's direct. Don't forget, everyone matters, period. It's not a political statement. All people deserve the chance to stay alive. People can do what they want to with it from there, but of course everyone's owed a living.
And then you go into Eat the Rich by Motorhead and you get that classic Lemmy, like I wrote this in 3 minutes. Like, here's the main idea over and over again.
Come on, baby.
Loving an elevator 46 times. But then you go into Fearless Vampire Killers, and there's so much good, like, we also talked about Band in DC and some other stuff from the Bad Brains record. Like they are from the DC punk scene with Scream and some of those other great bands. But this one is great because the first verse of it is, the bourgeoisie had better watch out for me. All throughout this so-called nation, we don't want your filthy money. We don't need your innocent bloodshed. We just want to end your world. Like, I love the idea of you saying there doesn't need to be nuance in the organizing. It's like we can clearly point to all roads Kevin Bacon 6 Degrees lead back to inequality.
You know what's right.
Right. It's very extremely common sense. It's stupidly common sense. And the fact that so many people, like, you know, exhibits A through F in this block all say the same thing different ways. At what point do we say, okay, enough is enough? I mean, I guess then we won't get cool songs like Nazi Punks Fuck Off after that. But, you know, I'm willing to live in a world where where the dead Kennedys are a relic of history that we study, and they maybe don't need a statue either. But I think I love the way that this block is organized because, you know, you get the two types of ideological debates that shouldn't be debates, and one is economic and one is social, right? And they're always interrelated, the identity politics and the economic class politics. So the first three, the Crass Song, Motorhead, and Bad Brains, are about that economic class struggle. And then the next three, the Kennedys and Propaganda and Sepultura, are all about the social struggle and classes of people being subjugated and that sort of stuff. So here's a nice fat block of music for you to just absolutely hurl bricks through rich, racist people's windows to.
Yep. And a few.
Oh my God, does that make us Antifa?
I'm on record as being anti-fascism. Yes. But
shout out to all the Profa people out there.
A few highlights that I think can branch off from this. One of the reasons I love punk is because I only need a minute to then send me on a theological 6-month journey, you know? So like Fearless Vampire Killers from Bad Brains, like this is a pretty light reference to Karl Marx talking about like vampirism inside of capitalism. And so, you know, speaking of all the people that may or may not be on the fence that we have the chance of talking to, hi, don't let people classify anything as Marxist. You don't have to agree with 100% of the reality of everything in everyone's life in order to learn from some of the things that they may have brought up. So like this idea of Karl Marx's critiques of capitalism are safe for your brain to consider. They won't turn you into somebody who doesn't enjoy free enterprise or businesses anymore. It's an easy thing to learn. So like that's where that reference comes from. Going into the Dead Kennedy song, like this is such a great example. You talk about the social aspect of all of this. Look, people seem to get confused about like who should we accept and not accept into the movement. What about virtue signaling? What about cancel culture? Some of these things are nuanced. Other things are like neo-Nazis showing up at a Dead Kennedy show where they went, we know how to handle this. Let's write a song. So they wrote a song that they play at the shows to disinvite the people who are there, fun fact, because apparently Dead Kennedys was using too much satire. And then the neo-Nazis thought, oh, I can get down with that, which is exactly how neo-Nazi shit always starts.
on Reddit. Punk shows for the Reddit
satire
of the 80s.
gone awry every single time. But inside of this song, right?
Shout out to the Rick and Morty fans. You're a Szechuan sauce away from becoming a neo-Nazi.
And we say that as people who love Rick and Morty.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
But like, I love even inside the song, like, Dead Kennedys are owning the scene, they're owning the community, and they're speaking directly to it. Punk ain't no religious cult. Punk means thinking for yourself. Here are more anarchists. This is not political speech. This is them saying, actually, we disavow all forms of authority. You're still a piece of shit. Get out of the show. Like, this is not hard, right? And they even circle all the way back at the end by saying, we ain't trying to be police. If you ape the cops, it ain't anarchy. They're even saying, if you self-police too hard, you're going against the movement. We reject the people who come here to enact violence and to hurt other people. We reject people who aren't willing to be responsible for themselves, which, if you take out the anarchist language, sounds a whole lot like individualism. And so we can learn a lot from one another. Maybe people we didn't really expect to.
I think the other point that I would make about this block of songs is like, they're all extremely crass.
Yeah.
And there's coarse language and sort of violent ideas. And to your point about like there being a little bit of satire and whatever. When I was growing up, my mom would always say, if I don't yell, you don't listen, right? So this is that.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're pearl clutching and you're more worried about the respectability politics of the whole thing, let that feeling sit with you for a minute, rather than like, I'm more worried about you saying fuck off than there being Nazis that are at the show harming people. Like, whose side are you on?
Yeah.
Really?
Right. And even that direct lack of nuance and just challenge to all the abstractions you set up is why I picked this Propaganda song. It's not well written or done, honestly.
Yeah.
But it was the first Propaganda record on Fat Records, like one of the only things I can enjoy from Fat Mike during the early 90s, as far as I know. But like, I love it because it just talks about it. It does this really kind of like child parent thing in the way that it's
directed at a dad.
Yeah. And, you know, the child is observing things like the Boy Scouts cheering for war and asking his dad, what's up with this? And without having to break it down into some theological framework, like the line that's important here and the reason that the title is so antagonistic is he's like, because if this country is so goddamn free, then I can burn your fucking flag. Like, the point is not everyone should be able to burn a flag. The point is, maybe you should hold up your concept of freedom every now and then, like we talk about, like lift things up and like look under them, especially on the dusty sides that haven't been examined for a bit, and just like pay attention. Like, freedom is not a zero-sum game. Like, there are always things that we want to do and not do, and anytime we take freedom away, the point should be to enhance the freedom that's important. And so, like, a song like this is important for us to keep in mind as we challenge any form of authority, because we have to ask, why do the people in authority only allow us to do certain expressions of ourselves and not others?
I think the fact that we as a country haven't gotten to agreement on, you know, what's rule number one in our country, like the First Amendment, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence, and especially when that's private or free enterprise or whatever. All of these songs owe a great credit to the existence of the First Amendment, but that's a thing that we're like collectively getting so wrong now and before and forever. And we probably won't be able to move forward until we can sit with that grasp of what freedom really means. Freedom is not like within the narrow conception of what it is. To your point, the revolution will not be televised. Like the left and the right are all right of center over here, and common sense humanity is to the left of all of that. And why? So there's a lot to be said for like freedom, red, white, and blue freedom versus real, actual, like liberated humanity.
Right. And it's not like some Loki in the Avenger shit where he's like, freedom is slavery. Like, no, it's not that. Like, it's neither of those binaries.
Orwell had some good ideas around that.
He did have a few. He wrote them down. And then you threw in a
ignorance
Sepultura.
is strength.
You threw in a Sepultura so that we could get Max Cavalera's input in here to wrap up this block.
I love a good tribal drum. So like this is the drum circle from Absolute Hell. I don't have a lot to say about it. It's just primal and raw, and the lyrics are not very nuanced. The title of the album, Chaos AD, is from a lyric in this. It's just like the world is like, we have externalized this concept of war outside of our door, but like what's happening is third world country level warfare being executed on our streets every day. The video, like I think this is one of the songs on this playlist where like the video is super important because the imagery is so visceral of like tanks rolling down city streets in America. And it really is like we bring hell home in a way that's not visible to most Americans who have the privilege to not care about any of this stuff. But if you do care and you're here now, you have to refuse this state of being as saying like, this is not a thing, that I flatly reject this as a condition of human existence for the name of public safety or law and order or, whatever. We say this in Atlanta, is a place that the police budget just got expanded by 20% or whatever.
We're having a hard time here.
Great job, everyone.
But that's, I hadn't really thought of this before, but like that sense of normalizing something horrendous to the point to where it just becomes subtext, like pay attention to when that happens. It's happening right now, where we've recently decided that some amount of people are just going to start dying every day as a result of a preventable pandemic.
That's a literal presidential position.
Yeah.
Right now.
I mean, and like, no,
deal with it.
and like, we're not really making statements one way or another. We're just literally pointing out what's happening. And we know for a fact that other countries, I mean, how many times in our lives ever are we going to have another experience where everyone in the world has to deal with the same thing that acts the same way? And we watch countries like New Zealand who did exactly what we all know we were supposed to do to contain this thing, and then they went to no cases. And in fact, they went to no cases, and then this is fun, I don't know if you know this, then they accidentally let in 2 cases on an inbound flight, and the person who was in charge of that in the government immediately resigned for failure to do his job. Opposed to
they'd
here,
get a promotion in Washington.
Right, as opposed to here where we say, dying from things is a fact of life, and we can't really just...
Not my problem, bro. Oh, hey.
But like, it's important to just like, even if we can't do anything to fix it, because honestly, I don't know how other than doing my small part, but like, now's a moment to pay attention to people deciding that something that should be in the foreground should move to the background so that we can get back to making money.
Yep. So all of this looks like, rallying your community around disinviting people that are going to bring hate and fear, and changing policy so that your tax dollars don't get siphoned off for a billionaire's third yacht or whatever. But it's thinking about like, these songs should motivate you and give you a vocabulary for, I hate this.
Yep.
What might it look like instead if we did something else?
Yeah.
So listen and enjoy this next block and get good and pissed.
All 6 songs will take a total of 1 minute and 17 seconds, and we'll see you back.
Fuck the military money, is somehow what to say. When I start a nation, why not trust today? At school I give you shit, drop you in a pit. Try and get up, you can't because they bash your man. Then you brought example of how I must obey. This is not the sample, if that's how you have it. Do I have, as I live it? Cause I do, oh, as I live it. Cause I do, oh, as I live it. Cause I fucking know that I'm ripping anymore. Roll a blow, just to call me sweet.
They say music is the food of love. Let's see if you're hungry now. Take a bite
Now I'll let you kick this one off because I've never been able to successfully defend the Clash in a conversation.
And nor am I necessarily. My entree to the Clash is even more embarrassingly 311. They did White Man and Hammersmith on a tribute record, and that was the first time I'd ever heard a Clash song like kind of knowingly, outside of Rock the Casbah and what's the other? Is there another big one as big as that? Is anything on London Calling as big as Combat Rock?
I don't know, but I feel like everyone knew about it via the London Calling poster.
Yep.
Like that was just it. That was
adapted from
yeah.
from Elvis Presley.
Yep.
A lot of weird cultural things to unpack with all of that. But I almost like Know Your Rights just more for the fundamental declaration than any of the nuance. And they were really interesting because I think they knew their place as like easily tipping into appropriation with reggae and other forms of black music. And I feel like, and again, this is somebody who doesn't have a deep understanding of the Clash, that like they were generally pretty respectful of the politics of the things that they enjoyed. And they certainly never shied away from a song like Know Your Rights, that they took really articulate positions on some of these sorts of things. All of the songs in this next block, which we've described as the mobilize block, are really around marches and protests and shows of force almost, right? So you have these ideas in your head, you need to like hit the streets with them. But what I love about this block of songs is, with the exception of the Discharge song, is like there is a forward motion, and then by the time you get to the end of this block, a joy.
Yeah.
Joy as an act of resistance. So you have Know Your Rights by the Clash, and then I think probably the biggest Discharge song. Is there a big Discharge song? Protest and Survive, which is such a good refrain. It's like, I think that's what a lot of people are doing right now. Here in Atlanta, you have the digital magazine, The Main Line, and they're like every day giving people the information. Like, here are the politicians you need to call. Here are the protests and where they're happening today. So God bless The Main Line and the work that they're doing.
A quick note on this song, because it's not super complicated, but just putting protest and survive together in the same phrase and then repeating it did help get some things through my skull, because I think even right now there are, especially no shade for this micro moment here, but even for people who live outside of a city,
no one listening to this in a place that's not Atlanta will be like, oh.
But if you're not in a place where literal protests are happening, or where there's a density of the problem that is being protested, it's easier to take up the mantle of, I'm not sure I understand why you need to be out there in the streets doing this. Why don't you vote? Why don't you go through the normal channels to make this work? And like, aside from the fact that takes 30 seconds to systematically dismantle as an idea, just this song, again, tying protest and survive together, helps me kind of like recalibrate, especially in the flow of these songs. Like, it's sort of like maybe you're on your way to the protest and you're like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. Like, is this too much? No. Protest is the way that change has happened here and everywhere all of the time in democracy. Like, protest is the step that happens when systematic voting does not produce the outcome that we need. This is survival for a lot of people.
Also the plot of the movie A Bug's Life.
We ride. I love that movie. That was a shocking change of pace. I love it. That movie's good, full stop.
The bugs are the proletariat.
From A Bug's Life to Public Enemy. Go.
So, okay, I can't remember the exact story. The governor of Arizona something, basically like shutting down the equivalent of a Black Lives Matter thing. And I'm sorry for being so inarticulate and unprepared to talk about the actual historical context. That's your job, man. Do you have the notes?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, dude was like, I don't want MLK Day to be a holiday.
Right.
But it's such a good exact moment because it's so indicative of what's happening right now too for people, where he is abstracting out his reasoning into what is probably a technically and legally acceptable argument, which is, I don't believe that we have the right to institute this day in the fashion that it was instituted. Okay? And all like nuanced legal arguments should always be welcome because laws mean things and they have to be specific. But the thing that was missing.
Also, point of reference, this was in 1990. This was not a long time ago.
Right. And it was right after the federal government made a movement to do this, right? And it did lose a ballot proposal. Voting didn't work, right? Basically, Arizona voters came out and said, we don't want to honor MLK. But like the important thing is when you're calling out this shouldn't happen from a legal perspective, there should be the world's largest comma followed by a but, which then follows with, it really matters to me that people are emotionally invested in being able to celebrate a civil rights icon. Here is what we can do instead. There was nothing after that. It was just, I don't want this to be a holiday, and I'm not a racist. There's your story. So then Chuck D is like, I'm about to walk my ass to Arizona.
All the way there. He said, I'm on a mission to get a politician to honor, or he's a goner by the time I get to Arizona. This is, so like, I would put Chuck D in my all-time top MCs because he is so singular in the way that like, he's barely rapping. Yeah. He just has a whole like, Faulkner sound and fury stream of consciousness that just happens to hit a cadence and occasionally a rhyme scheme.
Yep.
I don't even know where to hone it because it's just like it's all one big thing. But the line that I always come back to in this song is, "What's a smiling face when the whole state's racist?" And right before that, it says, see people smile wild in the heat, 120 degree because I want to be free. I love the sample from this, and it's Simon or somebody like that. It's like a 70s funk group, and it's a really heavy group, and it feels like the heat of Arizona, and it like has that weird oscillating. And it just has all the funk of like, get out in the street, and it has the kind of up and down cadence of a protest march chant. And it was, I always forget that it was about honoring MLK Day, which is, I didn't even think about that part being so timely with like the Juneteenth conversation. But it's just so furious and focused. And I love the idea of the way he localized it to one politician or a set of politicians or a political ideology or whatever. Like Arizona in 1990 can substitute for Minneapolis in 2020 or Atlanta in 2020 or New York City during the Occupy protests a few years ago or St. Louis in the wake of Ferguson. What he does really brilliantly here is honing in on a place and a person, and I'm going to change one heart and mind and policy, and then we'll march back on to the other thing because there's a bunch more assholes like this guy out there somewhere.
The two things that I love that really drive this thing home to me, first of all, that the terrifying bridge in this song is the original walk-on music for the Jackson 5 and screams.
Human screams.
Just giving you that sense of
it's a little
tension.
Death Gripsy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my favorite story about this, in 91, Public Enemy went on tour with U2, which is, go ahead.
That is the most Bono thing I've ever heard.
Oh, yeah. So they opened up for U2. They played Sun Devil Stadium in Arizona. They played only this song and then left the stage.
It's the punkest shit I've ever heard. I can't believe I've never heard that story before.
But like, to your point of just like, no. This one particular thing. No. We can do something about this. This was bullshit. And like Chuck D needs no introduction in terms of the excitement with which he is affrontive, I guess. But like, just following it through all the way to the edge. No. We didn't forget about this. This was for you. You literally, and we're not going to forget it. And we're not going to give you anything other than this. And then walked off stage. Like,
and what would become the number one party school in America?
I mean, yeah. I mean, for a song that only ever got played on MTV once and immediately made it to Nightline.
So tight.
Because it was so scary. To Bono's credit, someone asked Chuck D in the interview where he's talking about this. They're like, what did Bono do? He's like, he gave me dabs and then hit me in my chest and gave me a high five. I'm like, okay. See Bono back there like, we got him, bro.
U2 is so confounding for me.
Agree.
And Bono specifically, 99% of the time, it's so easy for me to be like, God, I cannot stand that dude. But then he goes and does one thing and he totally redeems himself. Let's segue out of that into an artist for whom I hope there is no debate. There was for a long time.
Yeah.
But as of the past couple of years, another artist that we have covered, an album the song is from, that we have covered in the main podcast, Riot by Childish Gambino, which I love because it samples a funkadelic groove that I love, like specifically two little parts of it right around the middle. And this song is really short. It's the punk song on this record.
Yep.
It's a minute and a half or so. But I also love this song because live, it's the song that he lets breathe the most.
Yeah.
And they play the guitar riff kind of on a loop. And it's where he uses that platform to do the kind of James Brown stage banter thing, but it's always a serious and mystical, very Donald Glover-esque thing. It's where he talked about like processing the emotions after his father died. It's where he talked about honoring Mac Miller's memory as a great artist and friend to all after Mac died in the show in Pittsburgh. And it's just generally like the moment of contemplation in the show. And he's, Donald is such a pensive and kind of melancholy and abstract artist. Like he never puts you directly in the path of the feeling, but he always leads you there kind of on your own. And I think that's why we talk about him in such breathless terms as a society. But I love this one because it is really visceral and it takes on the posture of Sly and the Family Stone in There's a Riot Going On. It's kind of a direct homage to that, but it also uses the funkadelic musical palette. But the chorus is, everyone get down, baby, fly high. And that's such a beautiful, like, I think of him as like the dad of multiple kids who's the voice of a Disney character and also Lando Calrissian. Mm-hmm. He has such a childlike wonder to the way that he approaches everything. And to me, like, this is when I'm talking about being joyful with the opportunity to protest and resist, and just like making the way for a better world is the job that we're doing. So it always takes on a negative, hard, challenging connotation when we're talking about hitting the streets and the physicality of all that and a full-throated awareness of the enemy that we're up against. But then I just think this song is such a breath of fresh air in thinking about the way that we might riot or resist with joy in our hearts. Like, because if they've stolen that, they've stolen everything that we if they've stolen our soul, then we have nothing left. And I think that's the gift that Donald Glover gives us as an artist, is like he is truly on this earth to remind us that we're here to be fully realized humans, and that should be the posture of your protest. Like your resistance should be your life. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Then you go into Long Walk to DC, which, like, I love that Mavis Staples was on the new RTJ record. Like, Staples singers are sublime. Like, they were a truly holy thing. And they did that thing with gospel music where it was like spooky. You know, it really, like, they touched the lightning rod that was the Holy Spirit, and they brought that out in the way that they sang together. And then you get to the late 60s. I think this version, certainly that's on the playlist, came out in 68. And, you know, it's in the wake of Dr. King's death and all, you know, all the marching and all that. But there's there's the electric guitar at this point, and kind of more of a Sly Stone type of rhythm almost. And there's a clear directive. There's a clear directive to, like, do it no matter what. I got a dime for some coffee. I got a dime to buy me some cake. I got to see the president no matter what it takes, right? So just remembering, like, the goal is to affect change with the people in power. And we've seen the symbolic value of a march on Washington again and again, and how that has made a difference as recently as the Women's March in 2017.
Yeah.
But, like, often it is those who have the least of us who are expending the most energy to do this thing. So if there are people like us, this can give resources to people like this that are going to do it come hell or high water, no matter what.
Yeah. I think two things are important that I walked away with from this song that I think can maybe take us into the next and final block. One is to be a little lighthearted about it. I think the story of the walk to DC here in this song is a good way to really understand why people were taking the action that they took. Yes, MLK was assassinated. Yes, they are marching in response to this. Yes, what else could they do, right? So there's already this sense of urgency. I must do something. At the risk of being a little too lighthearted, I do think it can help connect with people who don't really understand what was happening or what happens in protests. If you've got some care and energy and you don't feel like you understand why people are fighting about things, you can look at this story as the last time you were upset about something stupid in a store and you said, I need to speak with the manager. And they said, well, I'll go get them, but they might be busy and you're going to have to wait a while. And you sat your ass in that chair and you went, oh, I'll wait. Like the long walk to DC.
And then you start texting a literal million of your friends. Yeah. And when the manager comes out, they're like, oh, whoa, oh my God. Okay. Coupons for everyone.
Exactly. It's like, but it's that energy, right? Of like, no. I need to speak to someone about this because this is unacceptable behavior. And like the whole story of this, the long walk to DC, like these aren't just euphemisms. Like I have a dime for my coffee and a dime for my cake. These are incapable of buying either coffee or cake. The implication is I am unable to travel efficiently to DC. It matters to me so much.
Jackson, Mississippi.
Yes.
Right? An enormous sacrifice and physical journey.
And I will walk across southern states where I am not welcome to get to DC so I can speak to the manager. Give me the president now. I need to speak to someone about this. Like, I think that it really helps us to take some of these stories, especially from the civil rights movement, and remind ourselves that so many of them are literal. Just like we talked about with Strange Fruit, right? This is not an abstraction or a painting. This was a real moment. So I think looking at these stories when they're being told in direct ways like this as a real story is really helpful. For me, the line that really sticks out here and compelled me to go deep on this one was, even for the person speaking in this song, there's a line, should have been going on yesterday, but today I'm leaving here. And I think that encourages me for the moments where I go, should I have already been doing something about this? You know, it doesn't matter. Leave today. Like we keep talking about with that sense of direct action. You know what's right. Just start doing it today. Ask for feedback. Do it in community so that you do it well. But just start taking chances with kindness and compassion in your heart, and pay attention to what people say and find out how you can help better. But the worst thing you can do is to sit back and say, I can't be involved because I don't want to get canceled, be criticized, this sort of thing. If you have kindness and compassion and are in community, you will take the right steps and people will help you.
Yep. I mean, it's almost like an exercise regimen, right? Like take 15 minutes a day to do a small anti-racist thing.
Totally.
You know, call your city council person, like do the things that we should have been doing all along, holding people we expect to look out for our best interest, hold them more accountable. Like this is the sea change moment where we start to do something like that and we just make it part of our everyday life. If people made these incredible, like almost hard to believe sacrifices, they gave their whole lives for this movement. Like the least you can do is take 15 minutes every day to like read and share an article, have a conversation, call your city council person, read about your local budget and how decisions get made around that, help register people to vote, right? Look out for your elderly neighbors. Like just do one small thing a day, right? Like that's the whole theory of collective impact, is like, if everybody just did what they could from where they are, the world would be a lot better off. And I think we get so paralyzed thinking about the end zone that we like forget to try to get the first down first.
Yep.
And that's probably the first and last football analogy that's going to happen on this podcast.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to start from where we are. It is a long walk to DC, but we better get going today.
This is a public service announcement with guitar. Know your rights. All three of them. Number one, you have the right not to be killed. Semi-titulation of the human race set a course. I'm counting down to the day the server fitting for a king. I'm waiting for I can feel it deep inside my body. I've been watching all this all night. I got to move it. This pressure. This world don't feel my walking shoes on the way to Washington. I can't take a plane, bus or train, cause my money ain't that long. America, we believe, oh, that you love us still. So people, I'm going up yonder to wipe away my tears. I tell you, it's a long sea, but I'm on. Ooh, yes, I am. Ooh, yeah.
All right, yeah, let's hit this last block. We've done some intense plotting and organizing and strategizing and organizing and mobilizing. Probably not in that order. Yeah, I love the way that we leave this playlist. Kicking it off with Kendrick Lamar.
What's been called the "we will overcome" of this generation. And I love the kind of thorny, complicated politics around it and how it is like it's a song of hope and love and uplift, and yet it's still managed to be divisive for people. And part of that was the award show performance where he's standing on a cop car and whatever, but it has this beautiful poetic music video in black and white, and the message to me is so clear, is like, man, how could you not root for Black America when, in spite of everything that's been thrown at them, they still come back to we've always been fine. We've always achieved excellence in spite of all the obstacles. It's like, man, I want to be in that corner.
Yeah.
You know, like I will get behind and help push the people at the back of that pack that are tired, because man, what a beautiful message and what a beautiful way to live. It's like, no matter how hard it gets, life is still worth living. And even though we may not reach the promised land, you know, I still believe that it's the fight worth fighting. You know, again, plant the sapling that is in your hand. I mean, I don't feel like we have to say too much about this song because it's so seared into the consciousness right now. But I think in the 2 hours of music that we've been through up to this point with these 2 complimentary episodes, like you kind of need this deep breath in your lungs to like, this is the part of the movie where it fades out, and like, that doesn't mean the plot is over. Like, that's when it really starts, arguably. But like, you have all of this knowledge and you've done all of these things and you have these plans and you're moving and you're marching, and now what? I do love this. To me is like the anthem of, you see these organizers and activists and people reminding each other that like self-care and self-love is a radical act, and going back to the meditation thing, like putting on your own mask first, like remembering to rejuvenate so you have more juice for the fight.
Yep.
This is what that song does. Like, you talked about you made the joke about the wireless charging thing. This is like that for when you're tired. Like, you hear the weariness in this song.
Yeah.
But ... no matter what, we gonna be all right.
I already love this song for all the reasons you talked about, and I specifically love putting right on the other side of it Johnny Cash, because I don't want to focus too much on the people who may not be convinced that they can love other people in the world and fight to remove their oppression. But it's so good to draw out Johnny Cash here right on the other side of all right, because it's a similar type of alignment. It's a long road ahead. It's never going to be finished. But for Johnny Cash, I'm going to keep wearing black until this problem is solved. He didn't stop, right? But even inside of this, I think like I also love to bring Johnny Cash up in this context. You certainly do too, but like to remind people that the country viewpoint of good old folks has not always been opposed to the viewpoints of someone like Kendrick Lamar. That is a false dichotomy. We talked about political framing from a two-party system. That's a framing. It's not been this way. Johnny Cash is here talking about protesting the treatment of poor people, talking about mass incarceration, talking about addiction and the way that we treat people who are downtrodden by drug addiction, talking about Vietnam and all the young people that we killed in a war that wasn't helpful to anybody. And his ability to take the stance of, here's all of the things that's terrible, and I'm in a perpetual state of not being okay with any of these things. They all need to improve, and none of them will improve to the point to where it's finished, and that is my stance. I think is not only worth acknowledging and considering a return to for some folks who may more closely align with Johnny Cash than Kendrick Lamar in their brains, but also I feel it's worth calling out on this record, Man in Black, okay? One of the other tracks is a track with the Reverend Billy Graham. Like, I really want to, like, just put an eyeball on that little frozen moment in time where there was a part of history where Johnny Cash is doing a song about the downtrodden, impoverished, mass incarceration, addiction, war. And he's talking about all these. He's talking about how none of them are acceptable. And on this same record is a song with him, with what would become the world's foremost and most well-known preacher of gospel truth. And I use air quotes for a reason. But like, even in those songs, Johnny Cash is singing about what used to be simple gospel truths.
Yep.
Right? Jesus loves you. Jesus wants things for you. Like, you can join this community of people who believe in a better world and who support one another, like to the point where he's directly interfacing with the Reverend Billy Graham in a literal song, okay? And like, just think about that was even possible to have exist in reality when half a century later, essentially the Graham's legacy is homophobia at this point, an inability to reconcile the downtrodden people in society with statements of faith. There's no possible way that an idea like this could even flow through our society right now because people believe that they're contradictory viewpoints. And I always love using music to come back to a point and say, that was never true. And it doesn't have to be true now.
Oh, by the way, also on that record, there is a song about Vietnam, and it's not a Bob Dylan-esque anti-war song necessarily, but he tells the story of, it starts with him and June at breakfast, talking about how fortunate they are to have traveled all of these places. And he's like, well, we haven't been to Saigon, actually. And so they went over there and played a USO show, and it's the story of their experience of hearing the shelling and the bombings that are going on all night, every night. And he ends that song by saying, well, now that's about all there is to tell about that little trip into living hell. And if I ever go back over there anymore, hope there's none of our boys there for me to sing for. I hope that war's over with and they all come back home to stay in peace. And to your point, I think Johnny Cash, like, contains the multitudes, I guess, but just has like the common sense thread of like, why would anybody want anything different than this? Like,
tough guys don't have to love war.
How is this any different? Like, this is a gospel truth.
Yeah.
Where did we lose the way? I also love one couplet from Man in Black, in particular, because I think you and I have to think about like what it actually looks like to be an ally, right? You're hearing a lot from people around performative allyship and like letting people know that you're like, I'm one of the good whites. He said, we're doing mighty fine, I suppose, in our streak of lightning cars and fancy clothes, but just so we're reminded of the ones who are held back up front, there ought to be a man in black, right? So if you're the person with the platform, you're the person with the privilege, you should be amplifying. You should be a voice for the people behind you. Until the situation changes, whatever else you have to do is not really that important, more than making sure all the good people, all your neighbors get fed and live their lives and can experience the same life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness to which you have been entitled in your life.
And even that, I love that particular part of the song because it draws an unexpected connection with Dead Prez. Because like in that song, we talked about how they're self-critiquing their own culture, right? They're pointing to people and they're saying, you've got stuff. Now, what are you going to do with it, right? He's doing the same thing here. It's harder.
Another gospel truth. Our parents raised us to be like, to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yeah.
Where in the hell do you lose the thread of that? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
You've been blessed, whatever. You should then use that blessing and extend it to others. If not, you have failed in the eyes of God.
Yeah. And Cash is doing the same here, not only on the deeper level we're talking about, but at this particular time, country had taken its turn into rhinestones and Cadillacs.
Yep.
Like he's literally talking.
Cosmopolitan.
Yeah, he's literally talking to other musicians. Did you forget the trailer park? Like, did you forget all the people who got you here? Because they still don't have enough, right?
Do you not remember your brother getting cut in half on a saw? The wrong kid died. So then we end with Common.
Yeah.
With Letter to the Free, which was a song that he made for Ava DuVernay's 13th documentary on Netflix.
Yeah.
And you put that on there. I think I maybe tuned it out when I watched 13th, with all apologies to Common. So thank you for bringing this like fully to my attention. Talk a little bit about like put a bow on it for us, because I think there's no better place to end than this one.
I love in the context of direct action resurfacing the depths of experience and facts and truth. And Common is not someone I pull up every day to listen to, because essentially it's sort of like a lecture series.
Yeah.
He's almost like his own little TED Talk with a lot of style. But I mean, his whole delivery, right, is just, it's essentially spoken word with hip hop influence.
In fairness,
you know?
when you make fun of the kind of trope of conscious rap, I think Common is like the exact archetype that you bring into your mind, where it's like, all right, like we believe the same things, man, but just dial it back a little bit. But he's really on the money on this one.
Perfect point, right? This song or other Common songs often like taken out of that context. It's like, whoa, you're trying to cover way too much ground way too quickly, you know? Whereas if we've taken the time to sit with what direct action looks like, I think one of the most motivating things is to come back to, and here is a summary and a reminder of why we're doing this over and over and over. I'm going to keep explaining it to you over and over and over. Look at the 13th Amendment, right? Like simple things. This still exists. It hasn't gone away. Johnny Cash is still wearing black. Kendrick Lamar is still saying you're going to be exhausted, but you're going to be all right. I'm still telling you all the reasons that they're not all right are still in place. Here they are again.
You're right.
You know?
I think everything in this song is a 4.5 minute Cliff's Notes version of what just took us 2+ hours to do.
Yeah.
So that it's potent. There's a lot of density in this song, and he pulls it off really artfully. I think having lines in there like, now whips and chains are subliminal. They used to call us the N-word. Now they call it criminal. There are so many good little turns of phrase like that. I think some of the different musical facets of things that we talked about over the course of these past 2 episodes are reflected here. We talked about Bob Dylan and Stevie Wonder and some of those like, whoa, make you sit up in your chair moments. There's a lot of those in here as well. I also love that he ends each verse by describing this right now as America's moment to come to Jesus. And that's a phrase that, you know, we can pretty easily take for granted, but like, if we are truly under God and indivisible, like, you know, what does that really mean? Like, why can we not all agree on seeing the God in everyone and appreciating them for their differences and who they are, and trying to make a way for everyone? Like, how could it be anything but that?
Yeah. And that's why it's important to come back here after we spend the beginning of this playlist going, there is no God, clear the room. You know, Because by the time you come back to it, like, hold on, Kendrick, Common, and Johnny Cash all say, maybe we need to come back to Jesus.
Agree,
yeah. And like, that's because like there is a larger and more embraceable form of God, of religion, let's leave out religion, of God that represents what it could look like in this country, especially for people to be appreciated, loved, and supported, regardless of how they were born, when they were born, their parents, their grandparents, whatever any of that stuff is. All these people are saying we can come back to this thing. There's still a thing there, and we're all having trouble seeing it at the moment, and we're all having trouble calling it the same thing because everyone thinks their Jesus is different and hates the other Jesus or whatever. Like, everyone is using...
I'm in the front row and I'm hammered drunk.
Thank you for bringing up Talladega Nights right there. I appreciate that so much. But we adopt and adapt these things like God, and we turn them into these little creatures who do our bidding. And like, that's why I love the whole idea and narrative of this whole thing. It's like, we can give ourselves the space to say, turns out I might not have a great idea of what God is. Let's start from scratch again and go through this thing. And at the end of it, you're always going to come back to the real essence of it. You're always going to see what's actually there. And I feel like that's what Common is pointing out here that builds on all the other songs as well. Like, there is a truthiness that's under things that has a part to do with your intuitive heart. And if you can get quiet and then enable yourself to act based on what you're hearing, you'll experience God, and we'll be able to share that together. But it might look different than what you expected.
Enjoy these last few songs.
All's my life I has to fight, nigga. All's my life hard times like, yeah. Bad trips like, yeah. Nazareth, I'm fucked up, homie, you fucked up. But if God got us, then we gon' be alright.
Nigga, we gon' be alright. Nigga, we gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright.
Well, you wonder why I always dress in black, why you never see bright colors on my back, and why does my appearance seem to have a somber tone? Well, there's a reason for the things that I have on. I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down.
Southern leaves, southern trees we hung from. Barren souls, heroic songs unsung. Forgive them, Father, they know this knot is undone. Tied with the rope that my grandmother died. Pride of the pilgrims affect lives of millions. In slave days, separating fathers from children. Institution ain't just a building, but a method of having black and brown bodies fill them. We ain't seen as human beings with feelings. Will the U.S. ever be us, Lord willing? For now we know the new Jim Crow. To stop, search, and arrest our souls. Police and policies patrol philosophies of control.